Unfortunately, here we are again, and this time the situation is uglier than anybody could have predicted. Because when it comes to Remy Ma, Papoose, and Claressa Shields, the story we thought was going to quietly fade into the background just exploded right back into the front page. And you know what? Remy didn't even need a press conference to do it. She didn't need a sit-down interview. She didn't need a podcast. She walked straight into the booth, grabbed a microphone, and let off a freestyle that has now created an entirely new lane in the culture, which I'm officially calling marriage rap. Yes, marriage rap. Because what we just witnessed was not a song, it was not bars for sport, it was not lyrical exercise. It was a woman publicly dismantling the two people she feels have been speaking on her name nonstop for the better part of 2 years, and she did it with such precision that even the internet went silent for about an hour before the comment sections caught fire. If you are ready to get into every line, every angle, every receipt, every detail that is making the Breakfast Club interview look like background noise in comparison, before we go any deeper, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and make sure you turn the notifications on. We're going to need all of it. Because I am being honest with you right now, the receipts flying out of New York at this exact moment are spoiling what was supposed to be a private peace treaty, and the entire rollout of whatever Papoose was planning to drop next is being decimated before he even gets the chance to step in the booth and respond. Now, at the heart of all this chaos, after I picked up my phone this morning and saw that Remy Ma had quietly slid into a session and dropped a freestyle that immediately got ripped, reposted, screen recorded, and dissected by every blog from Hollywood Unlocked to the Shade Room, I sat there for about 2 hours unable to even form a sentence. I am not exaggerating. I am telling you straight up, this is one of those moments where you put the phone down, you stare at the ceiling, and you ask yourself how a story that supposedly ended at Christmas managed to come roaring back this aggressively in the spring. Because let's just rip the Band-Aid off and get right into it. Remy Ma had 2 full years of being dragged into a conversation she never started, 2 full years of waking up to her name appearing in headlines about a woman she has openly stated she does not want speaking on her, and when she finally decided to respond, she did not respond with a quote tweet. She did not respond with a statement through her publicist. She responded with bars. And every single bar landed like a hammer because every single bar was personal, specific, and aimed directly at the 2 people she feels have made her into a punchline at her lowest moment. So buckle up because this is going to be a long one, and I promise you by the time we get to the end, you're going to understand exactly why the entire culture is treating this like the most important hip-hop moment of the month. Before I get into the lyrics, let me lay the groundwork because some of you may have walked into this halfway through and are lost on how we got here. So, allow me to rewind. This whole mess became public in 2024 when Papoose and Claressa Shields decided to stop hiding what they'd been doing behind closed doors. They started showing up arm in arm, hitting red carpets together, posting each other on social media, broadcasting to the world that this was no longer a rumor, this was the real thing. Normally, when a couple goes public, the conversation dies down within weeks. But this situation was different because Papoose was not just any rapper. He was the husband of Remy Ma. He was the man who, for over a decade, had been publicly held up as the gold standard of ride or die loyalty in hip-hop. He was the man who waited for his wife while she served years in prison. He was the symbol of an unshakable union. So when he suddenly turned up at events holding hands with a 2-time Olympic gold medalist boxer, that visual broke the internet. And the conversation never died down because every time Papoose appeared with Claressa, the comments filled with the same question, where's Remy in all of this, and how does she feel watching this happen in real time? Now here is where the situation turned toxic. While Papoose has mostly tried to keep his side low-key, Claressa has done the complete opposite. She has been bold. She has been confident. She has been unapologetic. She has shown up to events looking like she had been preparing for the cameras since the night before. She is a world champion. She is one of the greatest boxers in the history of women's combat sports. She has nothing to apologize for. But the issue, according to thousands online, is not that Claressa is confident. The issue is that Claressa keeps pulling Remy's name back into the spotlight every time she gets in front of a microphone. And when you do that to a woman who has openly told you in multiple settings that she does not want her name in your mouth, eventually that woman is going to respond. And that is exactly the moment we are sitting in. The tipping point, honestly, was the Breakfast Club interview. You know the one. The interview where Claressa sat in front of Charlemagne and casually mentioned Remy by name, talking about messages, energy, history that Remy clearly never wanted to relive on camera. Picture the timing. Picture where Remy was in her own life when that interview dropped. She was already going through intense personal criticism. She was already dealing with public scrutiny over her marriage, her family, her choices. So, at the exact moment she was already absorbing more pressure than most people can handle in a lifetime, here comes another headline attaching her name to a story she never asked to be part of. I would have responded too. Anybody with a pulse and a microphone would have responded. The only difference is Remy Ma is not anybody. She is one of the most lyrically capable women to ever pick up a microphone in New York, and when you push that kind of woman to her breaking point, she does not respond with subtweets. She responds with a verse that will sit in the timeline for the next 6 months. And speaking of that verse, let's actually get into it because this is where the conversation gets serious. The freestyle Remy dropped is not long. It does not need to be long. Every single bar is doing work. Every single bar is calibrated. Every single bar is sitting at a precise angle designed to make sure the target audience, which is 2 specific people, feels every word. The first major shot came when she addressed Claressa directly, accusing her of leeching off her name to stay relevant in conversations that have nothing to do with boxing. And let me read that back to you slowly. Accusing her of leeching off her name to stay relevant. That is not a subliminal. That is not a clever wordplay. That is a direct accusation, on a track with a beat behind it, that is going to live on the internet forever. And then, just when you think she is done, she takes it another step further and accuses Claressa of copying her style, copying her energy, copying her aesthetic, even copying the way she dresses. According to Remy, this is not the first time Claressa has tried to study her playbook from a distance. According to Remy, Claressa has reached out in the past, slid into the DMs, asked for fashion advice, asked for style tips, all while, in Remy's words, dealing with her husband behind her back. Pause for a second. Read that again. While dealing with her husband behind her back. That single bar alone caused timelines to combust. That single allegation, dropped inside the rhythm of a rap verse, did more damage in 12 seconds than a 6-page Instagram caption could ever do. And here is the part that really gets me. Remy did not stop at Claressa. She did not give Papoose the comfort of sitting on the sidelines while she handled the other woman. She turned the mic toward her own husband, the man who has spent the last 15 years telling the world he helped build her career, and she questioned everything. She questioned the writing credits. She questioned the contribution claims. She questioned the entire narrative Papoose has carefully constructed about how much of her catalog he allegedly touched behind the scenes. The delivery was surgical. No screaming. No melodrama. No emotional theater. It was cold. It was calm. It was a woman with 20 years of receipts deciding this was the day she pulled out the folder. That move took serious nerve, because the second you publicly downplay the contribution of the man who waited for you, who held your name down for years, you are walking into a fight you cannot easily walk back out of. But can you blame her? Think about it from her perspective. For over a decade, Papoose has used interviews, podcasts, and freestyles to remind the public that he had a hand in shaping Remy's musical identity. And then, when the relationship collapses, when he steps out with another woman in front of every camera in New York, those same claims start to feel less like loyalty and more like leverage. So when Remy got on that beat and basically told the world that her bars are her bars, that her pen is her pen, and that nobody else gets to claim ownership of the work she put on wax with her own voice, that was not just a diss. That was a public reclamation of a career. That was a woman taking her name back in real time. We almost never see a female rapper of her stature publicly cut down the writing credit narrative of her own husband on a record. That is not casual. That is something you do because every other door of communication has been slammed shut, and the only door left is the booth. Now let me address the people already typing that Remy went too far. I hear you. There is a real conversation to be had about whether a woman still legally married should publicly air business that, in the eyes of the law, is technically still a shared household. There is a real conversation about whether downplaying your husband's contribution sets a precedent that hurts women in similar positions. I get it. But here is where I land. Remy Ma did not start this fire. She did not call up the Breakfast Club. She did not sign up for the photo shoots, the interviews, or the press appearances where her name kept getting pulled into a story she was no longer the lead character of. She was sitting at home minding her own business when somebody else decided her name was a useful prop in their own publicity rollout. And when you weaponize a person's name often enough, eventually they're going to weaponize their pen right back. That is the natural law of the rap game. And let me say something that will upset part of the audience, but it needs to be said. Papoose, you are a respected pen in the New York underground. Nobody is taking that away. The Law series put you on the map. The freestyles put you in the rotation. The mixtape era treated you well. But let's be honest. You never crossed into mainstream commercial dominance. You never had that radio anthem that lived in the clubs for 6 months straight. You never had that streaming era moment. There is no shame in that. Plenty of legendary lyricists never crossed over. But because that gap exists in your career, when your wife, who did cross over, who did have the radio hits, who did sit on top of the charts, publicly questions how much of her success was actually yours, the optics become very rough. Because now the audience is not hearing a disagreement between a husband and a wife. The audience is hearing a woman with platinum plaques telling a man with mixtape credibility that the math behind his claims never added up. And that is going to sting in a way no Instagram apology can fix. This is exactly why so many listeners felt the freestyle was not just a diss record, but a divorce filing wrapped inside a 16-bar verse. Every line carried 2 layers. On the surface, it was a rap. Underneath, it was a closing argument. And the jury, the entire internet, has been deliberating ever since. Some are standing firmly behind Remy, arguing she has every right to clap back after being dragged into headline after headline. Others are saying that, regardless of who started it, this should have stayed off wax. Marriage is sacred. Family is private. Putting your husband's writing claims on trial in front of 10 million strangers crosses a line. And those people are not wrong either. There is no clean answer here. Only the brutal reality that the internet is sitting in the middle of a triangle involving a Grammy-nominated rapper, a freestyle legend, and a 2-time Olympic gold medalist, and every single one has a microphone, a fan base, and a reason to keep talking. Now I want to talk about Claressa because there is something fascinating happening with her side of this story that almost no one is acknowledging out loud. While Remy and Papoose are spiraling into a public lyrical war, Claressa Shields has somehow positioned herself as the only person in this triangle who has emerged looking stronger. Think about that. She is the newest character in the storyline. She is the outsider. She is the woman who walked into a marriage the public considered untouchable, and yet, when the smoke clears at the end of each news cycle, she is the one still standing in the ring with the gold belt, still booking fights, still showing up to events with her head held high. While the rap world tears itself apart over who said what on which podcast, Claressa is busy training for her next title defense. And that contrast, whether you like her or not, is doing serious work for her brand. Claressa understood something early that most people in this situation did not. Her job is not to win the public relations battle. Her job is to keep winning fights. Every time she steps into the ring and walks out with another championship belt, she resets the conversation. Every endorsement she lands shrinks the noise behind her. She has leaned into the controversy with a confident swagger that is impressive whether you agree with her choices or not. Remember the gold love versus black love conversation. The internet melted that day. People were quoting her, debating her, breaking down what she meant, and even people who disagreed could not stop sharing the clip. That is a masterclass in cultural attention. Whether you love her or hate her, you're talking about her. And in 2026, attention is currency. But here is where it gets interesting, and this is the part a lot of commentators are missing. Claressa has publicly offered to settle this in the only arena she truly controls, which is the boxing ring. She has made multiple jokes, half-jokes, and full-on suggestions about taking the smoke out of the studio and into the squared circle. Obviously, Remy is not a professional fighter. Obviously, Claressa would dismantle anybody who is not a trained boxer. So the offer itself is a flex. It reminds the audience that on the physical playing field, this is not a fair contest. But it also reveals something deeper about Claressa's psychology. She does not want to fight Remy on Remy's turf, which is the booth. She wants to fight Remy on her turf, which is the canvas. And Remy, intelligently, refused both offers and chose to fight on her own ground instead. She walked into the studio, picked up the only weapon that has ever truly served her, and turned it directly on her opposition. That is generalship. That is strategy. That is 20 years of experience showing up in real time. And here is where I want to bring everything back to one specific moment in the verse that most people have not processed yet. Remy directly questions why Claressa keeps lying. Not why she keeps talking. Why she keeps lying. That word choice is intentional. That word choice is a legal-grade allegation dressed up in a rap bar. Because the moment you accuse somebody publicly of lying, you are daring them to come forward and prove their version with receipts. And so far, the public has not seen those receipts. Claressa keeps carrying herself confidently, but she has not produced screenshots, timestamps, or the kind of hard evidence that would back up her side of the narrative and silence Remy permanently. In the absence of that evidence, the burden of doubt keeps shifting in Remy's favor. That is the genius of the bar. Remy used the freestyle not just to vent, but to set a trap. And whether Claressa realizes it or not, that trap is sitting in the timeline, waiting. Then we get to the Papoose section of the freestyle, and this is where things shift from a celebrity feud into something that shakes the foundations of New York hip-hop. Papoose has spent years walking into rooms with a specific public image. The loyal husband, the underrated lyricist, the man who allegedly carried the pen for one of the biggest female rappers of the last 20 years. That image was the foundation of his entire public identity. And in the span of a single verse, his own wife walked over to that foundation with a sledgehammer and started swinging. She questioned the writing credits. She questioned the behind-the-scenes claims. She questioned the entire mythology of Papoose as the silent architect of her catalog. The most devastating part, she did not need to scream while doing it. She did not need to call him names. She did not need to play the wounded ex-wife card. She simply implied, with a rapper's economy of language, that the version of the story Papoose has told the public for years does not match the reality of how those records were made. That single move changed the temperature of this entire situation. Because the second you take the writing credit conversation public on a track, the streets dissect every song in the catalog. Producers start getting calls. Engineers start getting calls. Old session photos surface. Every voice memo, every demo, every studio receipt is suddenly relevant. And while I am not saying any of that has happened yet, the freestyle opened a door that is going to be very hard to close. Because once the public starts wondering whose pen wrote which bars, every interview either party gives from this point forward is going to be filtered through that lens. And here is the part that is the most underrated moment of this entire saga. According to multiple reports that surfaced around the holidays, Remy and Papoose had supposedly reached some form of quiet understanding. Nothing formal, nothing public, just a basic agreement that, going forward, the two would stop dragging each other into the headlines. The terms were simple. Keep my name out of your mouth and I will keep your name out of mine. And for a few weeks, that ceasefire was actually holding. Both parties were quiet. The blogs were quiet. The fans started moving on. But then the freestyle hit. And the moment it hit, every word of that supposed peace agreement turned into smoke. And listen, I have to address the people saying Remy violated the truce first. I hear the argument, but it misses a critical detail. A truce only holds when both parties stop pulling each other's names into public conversation. In the weeks leading up to the freestyle, Claressa Shields, who is publicly associated with Papoose, kept appearing in interviews where Remy's name came up. Whether Claressa initiated those mentions or interviewers dragged her into them is a separate debate. The public effect is the same. Remy kept seeing her name attached to a couple she had agreed to disengage from. And if you are Remy Ma watching the timeline light up with your name again, the truce starts looking like a paper agreement only one side is honoring. So when she walked into the booth and unloaded, that was not a violation. That was a response. This is something that I have been screaming about for years and nobody wants to hear it, but the same standard has to apply on both sides. You cannot, on one hand, ask Remy Ma to stay silent while her name gets dragged into every Breakfast Club appearance, every podcast interview, every red carpet conversation, and then, on the other hand, turn around and act shocked when she finally speaks up. That is not how human beings work. That is not how rappers work. That is especially not how rappers from the Bronx work. If you keep poking the lion with the stick, eventually the lion is going to remember that the stick is made of wood and the teeth are made of something else. And what Remy Ma demonstrated this week is that the teeth are very much still there. Now, let me pivot to something that has not gotten enough attention, which is the broader cultural pattern this story sits inside. Because if you zoom out for a second, this entire situation is not just about three famous people having a public dispute. It is about the way hip-hop continues to handle stories where women are the central figures. Every time a male rapper falls out with his wife, the conversation centers on his bars, his response, his next move. But every time a female rapper falls out with her husband, the conversation centers on whether she is being too aggressive, too emotional, too messy. That double standard is exactly why Remy's Freestyle hit the way it did. She refused to play the quiet, dignified, suffering wife. She refused the long apologetic Instagram caption. She refused the tearful statement. She picked the same weapon male rappers have picked for 50 years, which is the microphone, and she used it with the same aggression we celebrate when men do it. And you know what is genuinely funny about all of this? The same people who spend their afternoons praising male rappers for going scorched earth on their exes are now suddenly developing a deep concern for the sanctity of marriage when a woman does the exact same thing. Where was that energy when male rappers spent 20 years putting their wives, their baby mothers, and their girlfriends on wax with names, dates, and addresses attached? The double standard is so loud at this point that it is embarrassing for anybody who actually claims to love hip-hop as an art form. If you applaud the men for going hard, you clap for the women too. That is the contract. And Remy Ma just collected on it in a way that should make every woman with a microphone in this game stand up and pay attention. Now, let's talk about what comes next, because the most fascinating part of this entire situation is that we are sitting in the calm before the second storm. Papoose has not officially responded yet. He has dropped a few comments. He has hinted in interviews. He has acknowledged the freestyle. But he has not stepped fully into the booth and answered with his own song. And every hour that goes by without a response, the pressure on him to deliver builds higher. Because in the rap game, the longer you wait to respond, the more the audience assumes you do not have an answer. And Papoose, as much as he is respected for his pen, is now sitting in a position where his pen is going to be judged by the most demanding audience he has ever faced. He cannot afford a mid-response. He cannot afford a generic verse. He cannot afford anything less than a project-shifting moment because the woman he is responding to has set the bar at a level that requires elite execution. And let's be real about it. There are reports circulating that Papoose has hinted at the possibility of exposing things publicly if the situation continues to escalate. And I want to address that directly. Papoose, my friend, I would think long and hard before walking down that road. Because the second you go into expose mode after the woman has already aired her side first, you no longer look like the wronged husband responding to attacks. You look like a man trying to win the news cycle. And the public has a very short memory for sympathy in those situations. The audience tends to remember who threw the first punch, and the audience tends to remember who had the better delivery. And right now, the woman has both the first punch and the better delivery. So if you're going to respond, the response cannot be a long Instagram post. The response cannot be a tearful interview. The response has to be a verse on a beat with bars that hit at the same level of precision that her bars hit. And if you cannot deliver that, my honest advice would be to let the news cycle move on and rebuild your image through other channels. But here's the part that nobody wants to talk about. Even if Papoose delivers the verse of his life, even if he steps into that booth and drops something that genuinely moves the culture, the larger cultural narrative may already be locked in. Because the story the public has been watching for the last 2 years is not really a story about 3 people. It is a story about a marriage that the public believed was untouchable and the slow public unraveling of that belief. And every time a new chapter hits, whether it is an interview, a freestyle, a photo, or a comment, the audience is not really listening to the new chapter. They are reading it as confirmation of what they already suspected. So no matter how clean Papoose's response is, a portion of the audience is going to filter it through the lens of everything they have already seen. And that is just the brutal reality of being on the losing end of a public narrative. And while we're on the subject of cultural narratives, let's talk about Claressa Shields one more time, because there is a layer to her positioning in this story that I think deserves direct acknowledgement. Claressa has, very quietly, become one of the most polarizing figures in the entire conversation. She has fans who absolutely adore her. She has detractors who cannot stand her. And what is impressive, whether you like her or not, is that she has used both groups as fuel. The fans buy the pay-per-views. The detractors share the clips. Both ends of the spectrum feed her brand. And while Remy and Papoose are tied up in a verbal civil war that may take months to resolve, Claressa is going to step into the ring sometime in the near future, win another fight, and remind the public that her career is on a separate track entirely. That is the thing about boxing. The receipts are in the ring. The judges are at the table. The belt either gets handed to you, or it does not. And when your professional life produces that kind of objective evidence on a regular basis, it becomes very difficult for the public to fully cancel you, no matter what is happening in your personal life. But none of this changes the simple fact that the freestyle Remy dropped has rewired the entire conversation. Before that verse, the public discussion was about 3 people with overlapping stories. After that verse, the public discussion is about one woman who decided she was done being a side character in somebody else's narrative. And that distinction matters. That distinction is everything. Because for the better part of 2 years, Remy Ma has been treated as a footnote in a love story she never asked to be part of. She has been used as a comparison point. She has been used as a punchline. She has been used as a shadow that other people stand in front of to look bigger. And in one verse, she stepped out of the shadow and reminded everyone that the shadow was being cast by an actual person, with an actual catalog, with an actual voice, and with an actual willingness to use that voice. What really got to me, the more I sat with this freestyle, is the level of restraint Remy showed. She could have gone so much further. She could have named more names. She could have torched bridges that, even in her righteous anger, she clearly decided to leave standing. That restraint is what separates a tantrum from a strategic strike. A tantrum is when you say everything you feel in the moment. A strategic strike is when you say exactly enough to make your point and not one word more, so your opposition wonders how much you are still holding in reserve. Remy Ma left a lot in reserve. The freestyle was the opening volley, not the entire arsenal. Anybody who knows her catalog knows that when she decides to go all the way in, she goes all the way in. So if this is what she released publicly, imagine what she is choosing to keep private. That uncertainty is now sitting on Papoose's head like a storm cloud he cannot move out from under. Now, I want to address the way the internet has been covering this story, because the coverage has been all over the place. Some platforms treat it as celebrity gossip, framing the whole thing as another messy love triangle. Others treat it as a legitimate hip-hop moment, breaking down the bars line by line. The truth is, this story is both. It is gossip and hip-hop. It is personal and cultural. It is private business and public art. Anybody trying to fit it into one box is missing the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that we are watching, in real time, a female rapper navigate the most painful chapter of her personal life by turning that pain into art the whole culture has to engage with. That is not gossip. That is the oldest tradition in music. From Billie Holiday to Mary J. Blige to Lauryn Hill, women have been turning heartbreak into anthems for 100 years. Remy Ma is the latest entry in that lineage, and she did it in 2026 with a freestyle that landed harder than most full albums dropped this year. And speaking of the lineage, Remy Ma is not some new artist trying to use controversy to launch a career. She is a veteran. She has been in the game for over 20 years. She has gone to war with some of the biggest names in female rap and walked out the other side with her credibility intact. So when she steps into the booth in 2026 and addresses a personal situation through bars, that is not a publicity stunt. That is a master returning to her instrument. Every cadence, every breath control, every internal rhyme, every pocket she sits in on the beat, all of it tells you this is a woman who has held the microphone for 2 decades and knows exactly what to do with it. That is why the freestyle hit. not because the gossip was juicy. Gossip is always juicy. The freestyle hit because the execution was elite. And in a culture where everybody is trying to go viral with hot takes, elite execution still cuts through. Now let me get into one of the parts of the situation that I think gets overlooked the most, which is the question of what Remy actually wants out of all of this. Because if you really listen to her recent comments and interviews, she has not been asking for an apology. She has not been asking for compensation. She has not been asking for the relationship between Papoose and Claressa to end. She has been asking for one specific thing, which is for her name to stop appearing in conversations that no longer involve her. That is it. That is the whole ask. And honestly, when you frame it that way, it is one of the most reasonable requests anybody has ever made in a public dispute. She is not asking for revenge. She is not asking for damages. She is asking for the basic dignity of being allowed to walk through her own life without having her name dragged into the romantic narrative of two other people. And the fact that that simple request has not been honored is, in my opinion, the real reason this freestyle exists. Because if her name had been left alone 6 months ago, none of this would be happening right now. None of it. This is something the public consistently fails to understand about people in the spotlight. Just because somebody is famous does not mean their name is public property. Just because somebody has a platform does not mean every other person with a platform gets to reference them at will. And when you keep dropping a person's name in conversations they have told you they do not want to be part of, you are not being authentic. You are being disrespectful. And eventually, the person you are disrespecting is going to remind you that respect is a two-way street. That is what the freestyle was. A public reminder, delivered in the only language Remy Ma has ever needed to use. Let me also address the moral arguments flying around online because I have seen a lot of people trying to frame this as who is the good guy and who is the bad guy. That framing is lazy. There are no clean heroes and clean villains here. Papoose has done things that hurt his marriage publicly. Claressa has done things that have kept the situation in the headlines. And Remy has done things that, even if you sympathize, are still pretty aggressive. Everybody in this triangle has fingerprints on the situation. Everybody has played a role in keeping the temperature high. This is 3 adults with 3 platforms, making 3 sets of choices, and every choice has consequences. The freestyle is just the latest consequence. But here is what I do think is true. Even though there are no clean heroes, there is a clean answer to the question of who has been the most strategic in this entire saga. And the answer, by a wide margin, is Remy Ma. Because while everybody else has been reacting in real time, posting in real time, responding in real time, Remy has been quiet for stretches at a time, watching, listening, gathering information, and waiting for the right moment to strike. And when she finally did strike, she did not strike with 1,000 small jabs. She struck with one big punch that landed everywhere at once. That is generalship. That is patience. That is the discipline of a veteran. And it is the reason her name is now back at the center of the conversation, even though 6 months ago, the public had basically moved on from her chapter of the story. She did not chase the spotlight. She let the spotlight come to her. And when it arrived, she stepped into it with a verse that the culture is going to talk about until the next major hip-hop moment hits. So the question now is, what happens next? And I want to give you my honest prediction because I've been watching this story since the beginning, and I think I have a fairly good sense of where the next few moves are going to land. My prediction is that Papoose will respond, but the response is going to be measured. He is not going to go fully scorched earth, because going fully scorched earth would burn the bridges that he still needs intact for his own career. He is going to drop a verse that defends his pen, defends his contribution claims, and reframes the narrative around the role he played in the marriage and the breakup. But the verse is going to fall short of the cultural weight of Remy's freestyle because Papoose has never had the same level of mainstream pull, and the audience he is responding to is already leaning in her direction. Claressa, meanwhile, will continue doing what she does best, which is winning fights and making bold statements that keep her name in the cycle. And Remy will sit back, watch the responses come in, and decide on her own timeline whether to drop another verse or move on entirely. But the larger truth, the truth that nobody really wants to admit out loud, is that this situation is not going to be resolved by another song. It is going to be resolved by time, and by the slow grinding process of 3 adults eventually accepting that they are stuck in each other's stories forever. Papoose and Remy share children. They share a legal marriage. They share a history that cannot be erased no matter how many freestyles get released. Claressa, meanwhile, is locked into Papoose's life in a way that, regardless of what happens between her and Remy, is not going anywhere unless the relationship between her and Papoose ends. So the triangle is permanent. The faces will stay the same. The only thing that will change is the volume. And right now, the volume is at maximum. But eventually, like every story of this kind, the volume will come back down. And when it does, what we are going to remember from this chapter is the freestyle. We're going to remember the bars. We're going to remember the cold confidence in Remy's voice when she questioned the writing credits. We're going to remember the moment she looked at her entire situation and decided that the only person who could speak for her was herself. And that, more than anything else, is what this freestyle is going to be remembered for. Before I wrap this up, I want to leave you with one final thought because I think it is the most important takeaway from this entire situation. The lesson here is not about 3 celebrities. The lesson is about the cost of letting other people define your story. For 2 years, Remy Ma let other people define her chapter of this story. She let interviewers ask the questions. She let podcasters frame the narrative. She let bloggers write the headlines. And during that entire time, she was being painted as the bitter ex, the angry wife, the woman who could not move on. And then, in a single moment, she picked up the microphone and rewrote the entire narrative in her own voice. And the lesson there, for anybody listening to this video, is that no matter how big somebody else's platform gets, you always have the option to step up and tell your own story. You always have the option to reclaim your own voice. You always have the option to remind the world that you are not a footnote in somebody else's love story. You are the author of your own life. And once you remember that, everything changes. So, with all of that said, let me know what you think. Was Remy justified in lighting the freestyle off the way she did? Did she go too far when she questioned her husband's writing credits? Should the whole situation have stayed off wax? Did Claressa earn the smoke she is currently receiving? Is Papoose going to respond? And if he does, will the response move the needle or land flat? I want to read every single one of your takes in the comments below because the audience reactions are honestly just as interesting as the actual events. So drop your thoughts. Pick your side. Defend your position. Argue with the people who disagree. And if you made it all the way here, do me a massive favor. Smash that like button. Hit subscribe if you have not. Turn the notifications on so you do not miss the inevitable response that is coming. Because trust me, this story is not finished. The freestyle was not the final chapter. It was just the moment where the real story actually started. And the next time we sit down and talk about this, we're going to have a whole lot more to unpack and break down. So stay tuned, stay engaged, and I will catch you all in the next one.